The Medrash says that Kol Mashe Ira La'odam, whatever happened to Adam Harishon, Ira Yisrael happened to the Jewish people. Adam Harishon HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chnisa LaGan Eden. Adam Harishon HaKadosh Baruch Hu put him into Gan Eden. And he commanded him how he was supposed to, what he shouldn't do. The Ovar, he transgressed. V'dano b'teshiluchin, v'gerushin. Adam Harishon transgressed, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu sentenced him to be chased away. The Konein Olav, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu lamented over Adam Harishon, Eicha. Said Eicha. Where do we find Eicha? V'yomer lo Ayeka. Because the Torah says the word Ayeka, which is the same letters as Eicha. The Medrash mentions this concept, this idea, a couple of times. The parallel between Adam Harishon and Klal Yisrael, the parallel between Ayeka, where are you, and Eicha. The Medrash mentions it a few times. So we have over here the very first Musar Shvuz in history. The one word Musar Shvuz. Because Baruch Hu says, Adam Harishon Ayeka, where are you? We understand that Ayeka, at the basic level, Ayeka means physically, where are you? Where are you hiding? Because Adam Harishon was trying to hide. But obviously at a somewhat more level that applies to us, was asking him, Ayeka, where are you? Where are you holding? Where are you holding? You were told not to. You did it. Ayeka, where are you holding? Where are you holding in life? So, the concept of a Musar Shvuz, first of all, a Musar Shvuz is often something that could be one or two words. One or two words. And one of the most famous Musar Shvuzim in history backfired. Where do we find that? It's Gemara in Tainus. Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, was coming back. Ma'asav Rabbi Elazar, Ma'asav Shabar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Mimigdol Gedor. He's coming back from a place called Migdol Gedor. Mibeis Rabba, from his Rebbe's house. Yerachov al Chamor is riding the donkey, and he was riding V'samach Simcha Gedola. He was very happy. He learned a lot of Torah. He was thrilled. He had a Torah high, the high you get when you learn Torah, when you're learning good, and you get that, you're pumped up, you have that high, you don't even know why you're so happy. But he's happy. Samach Simcha Gedola. His mind was floating because he learned so much Torah. A man came over, for lack of a better translation, this man was incredibly unattractive, what we would call downright ugly. Amar lo shalom alecha Rabbi. Said shalom alecha. V'lo hechzer lo. Rabbi Elazar didn't respond. He didn't return his greeting. Amar lo, rather, Rabbi Elazar said to him, Reika, you empty person. Kama mechoar osoish. How ugly you are. Shema kol b'nei yircha mechorim krasar. Is everybody in your town as ugly as you? So, Kevan, the man said to him, I mean, can you imagine this exchange? The guy who is, anyway, attractively challenged, and he says to him, Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi. He says, boy, are you ugly. Is everybody in your town as ugly as you? So the man said to him, Eini yodea, I don't know. Elolech ve'emor le'uman she'asa'ani, go tell the craftsman who formed me, Kama mechor kli zeh she'asisa, how ugly is that kli that you've made? So then the Gemara says the most puzzling line of all. Kevan sheyoda be'atzmam shechota. When he realized that he did wrong, he offended the guy. Yorad min hachamar v'nishtatach lefanav. He got off the donkey and he bowed down to him and he said, "Please forgive me." And the Gemara goes on to the conclusion of this story. That's very, very bizarre. Guy comes over and he says to the guy, "Wow, you ugly. Everybody in your town is ugly as you." And he takes offense. Then you realize, oh, did I offend you? I'm sorry. Well, you didn't realize. What were you thinking when you said it? What were you thinking when you said it? So the answer is, before I should explain, that obviously Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon was not talking about the man's physical appearance. He was clearly not addressing his physical appearance. What happened was the man said, Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. There's a minhag, mindset in Derech Eretz, you don't go and greet a Rebbe first. As you see a Rebbe, you could nod your head, you could maybe say, you don't go, hey Rabbi, it's like, hey Rabbi, how you doing? How are things, Rabbi? And, that's a breach of Derech Eretz. So Rabbi Shimon was saying to him, wow, are you ugly? And you have ugly midos. Is everybody in your town as ugly as you? Yet the man took it personally, and because obviously he was very sensitive about the way he looked. And then Rabbi Shimon realized, you know what? Even though that wasn't my intent, I should have been sensitive enough to realize that he may take it that way, and therefore I should not have said it. So a person wants to, and he's trying to give him a piece of musar, that's what he's trying to do. So musar is it's a double-edged sword. Musar could work positive, can have a positive effect. And musar, if one is not careful, musar could be delivered inappropriately. Musar may have a boomerang effect and not bring about the desired results. To the contrary, it may bring about very, very negative results. What is musar? What is when you want to rebuke somebody? What's the best way to rebuke? So first of all, when you hear the word tochacha, you have to rebuke your fellow man. So the word tochacha, which we sometimes picture tochacha as the strict, stern headmaster principal, really letting somebody have it, telling him where he is, what he's done wrong. You picture somebody really letting somebody have it. There's a famous story of the Chofetz Chaim, where the Chofetz Chaim, one of these traveling preacher, came to the Chofetz Chaim and he said, I go around from town to town and I give people musar, and I don't know if I'm being effective. So the Chofetz Chaim said to him, could I ask you a question? When you give musar, do you yell? This guy said, do I yell? Do I ever yell? I mean, it's fire and brimstone. So Chofetz Chaim said to him, can I ask you a question? Did you put on tefillin this morning? So the man looked at him, of course I put on tefillin. Why wouldn't I put on tefillin? What's the shayla? So Chofetz Chaim said, when you put on tefillin this morning, did you yell? So he said, no, why would I yell when I put on tefillin? So Chofetz Chaim said, why would you yell when you give people musar and tochacha? The idea of tochacha, that you got to really come on harsh, be strong. The word tochacha, I heard from Rabbi Zil Malevsky, Zechron Livracha. He writes, he said, tochacha is related to the Hebrew word nochach, as in the pasuk Shifchi Kamayim Libech Nochach Pnei Hashem. Tochacha means taking a person and placing the person in front of himself. It means you take a person and you show a person who he is and what he really could be. Put the person in front of themselves. That's what they always say when you give a child, when you want to rebuke a child, don't tell the child you just did something wrong. What you say to a child is, a boy like you doesn't do that. So you built him up. And he realizes we didn't specify what kind of boy he is, but he hears that there's something more that's expected of him. For you, this is pasnish. For you, this is inappropriate. The proper tochacha is to show somebody who he is, like it says, Shifchi kamayim libech nochach pnei Hashem. In front of a God. It's related to the word nochach. Tochacha is nochach. Place the person in front of himself. So, Adam Rishon HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ayeka, where are you? Ayeka, where are you? And that's ultimately what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Klal Yisrael and Eicha. Where are we? Where are we holding compared to who we are and what we should be? Where are we holding? Are we where we're supposed to be? So, I heard once I read once, this guy is at the airport, and he's at the check-in counter, and things are moving kind of slow. And he wants a specific seat. I'm sure anybody who's traveled has had these frustrating experiences. And finally, he loses patience, and he goes up to the counter and says to the lady, I asked for a certain type of seat, but I wasn't happy with the seat, whatever this guy's story was, starts giving her a hard time. So she says, sir, sit down, and I will call you when it's your turn. Now please sit down. I've seen ladies get very aggressive at the counter. I heard one lady said to the guy, sir, if you don't sit down, I will put you in the middle seat for the entire flight. And the guy sat down. He sat down fast. So sometimes people get very aggressive. So this guy says, hey, I want my seat. And she says, sir, sit down, and I'll call you when it's your time. Says the lady, do you know who I am? She looks at him and goes, do you know who I am? So she takes the microphone, she announces over loudspeaker, ladies and gentlemen, we have a man here who does not know who he is. So I heard the story and said, you know what? That's us. That's every one of us. Hayeka, do you know who you are? Do you know what your potential is? Do you know where you could go? I was once walking here in Yerushalayim in a secular neighborhood, a not yet religious neighborhood. And you know, sometimes they have, unfortunately, when somebody passes away, they put out the big posters. And you can tell when it's a frum poster. And then they have once in a while, you can tell when there's a different style. You get used to the nuances when you live here long enough. And I saw a poster in a not secular neighborhood. It was obviously a secular man had been nifter. And this poster caught my attention. I was walking past, and the poster caught my attention because the name on the poster was Yaakov Kamenetsky. And I thought to myself, my goodness, you could be Yaakov Kamenetsky, or you could be Rav Yankov Kamenetsky Zatzal. Can you imagine there could be two Yaakov Kamenetskys? What's your potential? Who could you have been? Yaakov, did you end up Yaakov Kamenetsky? Or you were Rav Yankov Kamenetsky? The potential that a person has. Show a person. That's proper tochacha. Who are you? And who could you be? I was once flying from LA, and being a Kohen, complications of flying for a Kohen, checking the flights, if there's a body, different, all sorts of halachas, the whole world that many people are not Kohanim, are not aware of. And you have to check if there are going to be bodies on the plane and so on and so forth. So I had booked my flight from LA to Germany. And in Germany I was going to get El Al. El Al in Germany is not a problem coming out of an American major city, coming out of Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. So the likelihood, what Dovid Feinstein told me many years ago, the likelihood is better than 50% on El Al that there's going to be a body. So I don't book, I go through Germany, and in Germany you don't even have to check, because the likelihood of a body on a plane in El Al coming out of Germany is very slim. So I booked my flight, and I was flying from El Al. I was supposed to be on United. I get to the counter, and they tell me I'm flying on Lufthansa. United and Lufthansa have a code-sharing agreement, so I have to get on a United flight. Okay, on a Lufthansa flight. All right, so I go to the counter, and it's basically me and a couple of hundred of them. And I figured this is going to be an interesting experience. And I give the ladies at the counter, and I give her my passport. And she says, "Just 1 second, sir." And she turns around, she goes over and talks to the supervisor. And I was waiting, I had plenty of time to the flight, but I decided that she comes back, and again she starts doing something. She says, "Sir, just wait." She goes back a second time, and I wait about 10 minutes, she comes back, and at that point I said to her, what seems to be the problem? It's a perfectly good ticket. And she says to me, to my utter shock and dismay, she says, "Well, there are 2 David Kaplans on this flight." So, I didn't expect any other Jews. I certainly didn't expect another one of me. And she says, "There are 2 David Kaplans on this flight." Now, at that point, I'm very curious to see, well, who am I? All right? Let's see the other me. And so, I'm waiting, and she said, "Well, we just didn't want to get the baggage mixed up," and so on and so forth. I looked around to see myself. I couldn't find myself anywhere among the people. They all looked like it was me and 200 Aryans. And I get on the plane, and after about 20 seconds, I'm sitting. I'm going to sit down, and I hear, "Will passenger David Kaplan please identify himself?" I was honored. I'd never been called. I thought maybe, the first thought is, they just remembered they're going to upgrade me to first class. What could this be? And it just is nice to get a little attention. And so I stand up immediately, and the guy comes over to me and says, "Oh, you're David Kaplan." And says, "And you're David Kaplan." I turn around. There's a guy who looked like he came from North Tel Aviv, a man that does it going back about 20 years ago. This guy looked like he was in his late 60s, no yarmulke. And the stewardess says, "Okay, I just want to know, you ordered a kosher meal, right?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You did not?" He says, "No." And the steward turns around and leaves. And I turned to the guy. I said, "You didn't order a kosher meal?" And he goes, "No, I don't eat kosher." And I remember thinking to myself, now, here, in front of them, and you're not going to eat kosher? And I remember realizing you could, I'm not necessarily contrary to rumors, I am not one of the 36 tzaddikim of the generation. But I try to do my best. And to not eat kosher on a Lufthansa flight that's where a person could go. That's what, put the person in front of himself. Put the person in front of himself. That's what effective tochacha is. The end of the story, by the way, was I actually got I got up to daven. I used to be very self-conscious about davening when I'm traveling. You know, you kind of get stared at, looked at. And I was very self-conscious till I was once sitting in the airport in New Jersey, and I had a daven, and I was sitting with my wife and like trying to think what corner am I going to go to and how's this going to play out. And I heard a low rumbling sound, and this rumbling sound got oompa, oompa, and it got louder and louder. And all of a sudden, a whole group of Hare Krishnas came by with these blazing orange robes and this hair, just one big thing sticking out of their head with the rest shaved off. And I just remember thinking, you know, if these guys aren't self-conscious, I certainly don't have to be self-conscious. So I got up and I davened. So on this Lufthansa flight, at a certain point, I went over to one of the, what do they call them now? They're not allowed to call them a stewardess. You get sued. What do they call the cabin attendant, flight attendant, whatever they're called. I said, is it okay if I say my prayers over there? So she says to me, yeah, I'm a Muslim. I like when somebody prays on the plane. Yeah, you can stand over here. So I thought of the irony of the Jew and the Muslim standing in front of 200 crowds on this plane. And there I am with my tallis, and 200 people were trying not to look at me. You could tell they're trying not to stare. I loved it, every minute of it. It was a highlight. So a friend of mine told me, as a young lady, she developed a parasite in the brain, and she had to have surgery. So she went to the doctor. The doctor did the surgery. Surgery was successful. And after the surgery, the doctor says to her, can I ask you something, young lady? Are you Jewish? Now, you know, nowadays, to ask a question like that also is, you know, you're setting yourself up for a lawsuit. You can't even ask, are you human? You can't ask, what are you? No matter what you say to a person, says, oh, hello, sir, don't call me sir. I'm not a sir, I'm a turtle. Right? So you can't call me that. And that's the world we live in. It's not my fault, that's the world we live in. And you get sued if you think otherwise. So even thinking it. So he says to her, young lady, are you Jewish? And she says to him, yes. Why do you ask? Very unpleasantly. He says, well, the parasite that you had in your brain is a parasite that comes from massive pork consumption. And I know that Jews don't eat pork, so I'm just wondering how you got this parasite. So she said to him, as a matter of fact, I am Jewish, but I'm not religious, and pork is my favorite food. And she is today a Balas Tshuva because of that Musar Shvuz. So you never know when the right word at the right time, when it's going to have an effect. That's the first message to Adam Rishon, and that's the message to Klal Yisrael with Eicha. Eicha Ayeka. Where are we? Where are we holding? Where are we standing compared to where we could be? The first communication between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the first Jew in history, which is Avram Avinu. The first words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha. 4 letters, 2 words, 4 letters. Lech Lecha. And that Lech Lecha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the first communication, that encompasses the entire future and destiny of Klal Yisrael. 2 words, 4 letters, and all the next few thousand years of Klal Yisrael is covered in that one expression. What does Lech Lecha mean? So on a basic level, Lech Lecha means that we're going to be on a move. We're going to be in Galus, the wandering Jew. And Avram Avinu is told, Lech Lecha. That's going to be the future of your offspring. They are always going to be in motion. Klal Yisrael is always going to be moving. We've been moving from place to place. Rav Yankov Kamenetsky Zatzal, the Rav Yankov Kamenetsky, he once said, the dome right over here, 15 minutes away, the dome that's sitting right on the Mokom HaMikdash, Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky, believe it or not, he said, you know what, that dome is not such a bad thing. Because that dome is a reminder to us that we're still in Golus. That dome is a reminder that we're still wandering. The fact that we are here, and the fact that we're in Eretz Yisrael, and that we are more or less under our own jurisdiction, depending on what the Americans decide. At the end of the day, we're still in Golus. And that dome is a reminder, don't get too cushy, don't get too comfortable. That dome is a reminder. Rav Weinbach Zatzal said that when we, unfortunately, the Frum, who are always criticized, and we are the object of ridicule by many in the country who look at us and point to us. We're parasites, we're leeches. And the irony is that this is, and Rav Weinbach said, we learn in Kollel, and therefore we're parasites. This entire country is the biggest Kollel in the world, because all they do is get money from America. So we're being criticized from taking from the takers. Right? So I don't understand. First degree taking is okay, second degree taking is not okay. I'm not sure where that line is. But at the end of the day, we're still in Golos. Here we are, we're in Golos. So we have to realize that it's a Golos. That's the first Lechacha. And Rav Gifter Zatzal, Rav Shiva tells, Rav Gifter once said, there's an interesting phenomenon. Every single city that you go to in the world, go to New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Toronto, Johannesburg, if you're brave enough, go to any city in the world, and there's always the old Jewish neighborhood. Isn't that true? That's where the Jews used to live. They used to live on the south side till they moved up to the north side. They used to live on the west side till they moved off to the east side. Every single Jewish neighborhood. Like, there's always the old, that was the old Jewish shuls, and that was the old Jewish butcher shop, and there are still a few diehards who live there. Why is that? In every city there's an old Jewish neighborhood. Why not just stay where you are? The answer is, our Gifter said, that's also part of Golos. That's a reminder that we're in Golos. That even when we're in Golos, we go into Golos. That there's no such thing as the Jews dropping roots in any city, and this is it, this is the new neighborhood. The new neighborhood, there's always a new Jewish neighborhood. And the new Jewish neighborhood is only going to last for a while until there's a next new Jewish neighborhood. Because that's a reminder that we're in Golos. That's what our Gifter said. So the first idea of Lechacha is go. You're going to be on the move. You're going to be moving around, the wandering Jew. Idea number two, Rabbeinu Bachai says that Lech Lecha is related to the Hebrew word lichluch. Lech Lecha and lichluch spelled the exact same way, out of yud. Lichluch, filth, dirt, vulgarity. Lech Lecha is the tafkid of the Jew in the future is going to be get away from the vulgarity, the filth, the disrespect of your society. Lech Lecha, move away from it. That's the tachlis of a Jew. The problem we face nowadays is that a Jew can usually, to fulfill Lech Lecha, you went from the outside into the inside of your home to get protected from the lichluch. Now a person can go from the outside into his home and be exposed to more lichluch. That's a challenge, it's a difficulty. But that's the goal of the Jew. The goal of the Jew is Lech Lecha, get away from it. Whether it's values, filthy values, vulgarity, exposures, and that's the second tachlis of the Jew. Third tachlis of a Jew is to, Lech Lecha means not the physical movement of a Jew. Lech Lecha means move, grow, achieve, accomplish. Lech Lecha is your tachlis in life. We weren't put here to stagnate. We weren't put here to run in place. We were put here to grow, to move, to Lech Lecha. And the growth of Lech Lecha, I was once sitting next to Rav Moshe Carlebach, Shenev Refuah Shlema, one of the fabulous Rabbeim we had here at Ohr Somayach. Moshe Carlebach, a massive Talmid Chacham, he wrote a parish on Rabbi Kiva Eger, wrote Sfarim on Rabbi Kiva Eger. And he was once talking to somebody, and he had his notebook. In the old days, people actually used notebooks with pens, the kind of what they call loose leaf notebooks. And he was talking to somebody, so I happened to pick up his notebook, his loose leaf notebook, and his notes on Rabbi Kiva Eger, and I was leafing through it. And I got to the back page, and on the back page, there's a picture. There's a picture of a California redwood, a sequoia tree, that somebody had taken a picture from the bottom up. So you got a bottom angle, you're looking up this tree. This tree goes up, it disappears somewhere in the sky. And he's got this picture in his notebook. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing? You got notes on Rabbi Kiva, where do you do this picture here? He said, it's a reminder. It's a reminder, always have to grow. Always have to grow. The Aron Kodesh is made out of wood. It's coated by gold on the inside and gold on the outside. The Aron is the middle box. Contrary to popular belief, people, when they think of the Aron Kodesh, they think of the golden ark. The gold is only the coating of the Aron Kodesh. Okay, it's not put on like regular coatings, it's actually a box within a box. The box on the inside, a box on the outside. But the middle box is made out of wood, and Rav Hirsch says that that's a message to us that wood comes from something that is alive, something that grows. And the message to us is that the container for the Sefer Torah, the box that holds the Torah, the Luchos, is a reminder to us always that we're supposed to grow, the same way that the wood grows. The box is there as a reminder that the Aron Kodesh reminds us that we're supposed to look at Torah and use Torah as a means of growth and constantly growing. So there are all sorts of areas of growth. A person could grow in Bein Adam L'Makom, a little more focus on tefillah, a little more conscientiousness to learning, a little more dikduk in halacha. There are many areas. Everybody knows everybody knows where their area of growth, where it is that perhaps there's room for a little bit more effort, a little bit more focus. There's also Bein Adam L'Chavero. It's a very interesting thing when you get to Bein Adam L'Chavero. How do we begin? Where do we begin in Bein Adam L'Chavero? Here we are. The first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of a Zorgulur Shvichas Damim. Second Beis Hamikdash, the Roman exile, the one we're in right now, Gemara says openly because it is Chinam. Obviously, something in the interpersonal relationships requires an upgrade. So, in this week's Parshas Dvarim, we read, HaKlal Yisrael are compared to stars. I don't have the pasuk in front of me, but pasuk says that you'll be like stars. Right? We're compared to other things as well. The pasuk this week says, I think it's pasuk Tes, pasuk Yud, right in the beginning of Parsha, and that we're going to be like stars. What does it mean? Why is it that Klal Yisrael are compared to stars? What's the idea of being compared to Kochavim? So, idea number one is there are millions and billions of stars, and obviously anything involving astrology, astronomy, any of that, we understand if HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the stars, although they look like it's just a mass, every single star has a tachlis. Every single star in the world has a purpose. Obviously, it wasn't created there by accident. And whatever the hashpah is, once you get into these various chachmas of how the world works, and the mazolos, and the kochavim mazolos, every one of them is there, and it serves a function, it serves a purpose, it has a purpose. And the first message of being compared to stars is that every single Jew has a purpose. Every single one of us has a tachlis. The life circumstances that we have, and it may be the positive things in our life, it may be the challenges in our lives. HaKadosh Baruch Hu rolls out the life circumstances for each individual so that each individual could fulfill his tachlis perfectly. The Gemara says Rav Chizda lived to 92 years, and he had celebrations constantly, and Rabbi lived to 40, and he had constant tragedies. And yet, each one was given the exact life circumstances. Rabbi and Rav Chizda were given the life circumstances necessary for each one of them to fulfill their tachlis. Nothing was random or haphazard. I was once in Gateshead, and I had the privilege of eating with the Gateshead Rav, Shraga Feivel Zimmerman. And he told me that he got a phone call. A guy calls him up from Scotland. A goy from Scotland calls him up. He says, "Hello, is this the chief rabbi of the Jews?" He says, "Well, I'm the chief rabbi of the Gateshead community, which is about 300 families." So he says, "Well, I have a confession to make." He says, "Well, we don't do that sort of thing. Maybe you want to go to a priest." He goes, No, it involves the Jews." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, come down and speak to me." The guy walks in. He says, "Last month I went to one of the concentration camps, and I went into a crematorium, and I decided to take a souvenir. So I pulled this stone out of the wall, and I took the stone home as a souvenir from the crematorium. And then when I got home, my conscience started getting to me, and I figured, maybe that wasn't a very sensitive thing to do. and I don't know what to do with this stone. You're the chief rabbi of the Jews. I guess you'll take care of it. He puts down the stone and he walks out. So Zimmerman told me the first thing he did is he looked at the stone to see if there's any human residue on the stone. If there would be, then the din has to be buried. It's kfura. Looked it over, he said there's nothing on the stone at all. At that point, there's no halacha. At that point, you take the stone and throw it in the river if you want. May have sentimental meaning, but it has zero halachic obligation attached to it. So he didn't know what to do with the stone. So he called his Rabbi, Rabbi Dovid Soloveitchik Zatzal. He told me, he asked Rabbi Dovid what to do with the stone. He said Rabbi Dovid was silent for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, he said to him, the pasuk says, Even mikir tizak. The stone cries out from the wall. He said that stone, and that crematoria witnessing what it witnessed, was fulfilling its purpose in the Bria. It was serving its tachlis in the Bria by playing witness to that, the atrocities that it saw. Therefore, I want you on your next trip, I want you to try to find the place where it came from, try to replace the stone. Rabbi told me, he went a few months later, went back, he looked around, he found the place, and he replaced the stone. So every single stone in the Bria has a tachlis. The same way that every stone has a tachlis, every Jew has a tachlis. There's nobody who could do, no two Jews could do the same job. And the Sefer HaChinuch says that that's why, in the mitzvah, first mitzvah of the Torah is pruvu, to be fruitful and multiply. Because the more Jews there are in the world, the more diverse ways there are that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being served. And each person who serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being Mekadesh Shem Shemayim in his way. And therefore, the first lesson from the stars is that the same way that every star clearly has a tachlis and a purpose, every Jew has a tachlis and a purpose, number one. Number two, stars are huge. When we look up in the sky, what do we see? We see a dot. We see a little dot. If we could get closer to the stars, and I'm sure that Mr. Musk and Branson and all these people are working on it already, first they'll get to Mars, send somebody for 3 years traveling to Mars. They've got a list of volunteers. They got so many people are willing to leave and go traveling for 3 years just to get to Mars. They'll figure out a way how to feed them and everything else. I guess their shalom bayis ain't great. So, they'll go traveling 3 years to get to Mars. Because that'll really help us down here. Because they got everything on Earth is worked out already. Everything down here is just everybody's happy as a lark. Now we can worry about getting to Mars. Stars are farther. What's the nearest star? 3 million light years, something like that, 5 million light years away. Not that much. You could do it Ben Hazdar. So, when you get, theoretically, if you got closer to a star, what would you see? The closer you get to the star, the bigger it would become. They're huge, right? They're many times bigger than Earth. And the closer we get to the star, the bigger the star would become. When you look at another Jew, we're sitting in a basement, somebody sitting here, somebody sitting here. Yeah, Nachayid, make a song out of it. Nachayid. And then what we could do is, any 10 of us could make a minyan. We got a 10 minyan of Jews. Okay, you're a Jew and I'm a Jew, we're all Jews. Unfortunately, and you know as well as I do, when do we find out what people are really all about, unfortunately? At a levaya, at a base of Ovel, when people start telling stories about them. And also you start hearing things. Wow, I didn't know that he hasn't missed the Daf Yomi Shir in 35 years. I didn't know that he secretly supports 20 families. I didn't know that he makes a seal mishnayos every 2 months. I didn't know that he volunteers at an old age. So many things, so many stories that we hear. I never knew that. And the lesson is, the closer we get to the Jew, the more we find out about him, the bigger he becomes. That's a comparison to a star. The closer you get to a star, the bigger the star becomes. The closer you get to a Jew, and all of a sudden you find out. And the lesson to us is to not take each other for granted. To realize that there's another person in the room, and no matter how much my dveikus is during davening, the other person's davening also. And his davening may be worth a lot more than my davening. His davening may be valued by HaKadosh Baruch Hu because I don't know anything about him. And if I knew really about him, I'd have a much more respect for him in my heart than I do right now. And that's the second lesson of being compared to stars. To realize that there are people, and we don't know their challenges, we don't know what they've overcome, we don't know how Kodesh Baruch Hu measures these things. We only know that there's somebody over there who, if I could get a really good exposure towards him, up close exposure, he'd be much bigger than what I see when I see him sitting in a base medrash or sitting in a shul or on a bus or anywhere else in the community. And number 3, and possibly the one that we have to work on most on a Tisha B'Av, that we should take to heart. Rav Shimon Schwab in a Sefer, Mayan Beis HaShoeva, he says, when did the stars come into existence? So everybody knows the famous medrash. The moon came to the Ribbon Shalom and said, how can you have 2 kings with 1 crown? 2 malachim b'keser echad. Can't have such a thing. The king said to the moon, you're absolutely right. L'chi umati es atzvech. Go and reduce yourself. And I'm sure that wasn't what the moon wanted to hear. The moon was probably thinking, no, that's not where I was going with this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, L'chi umati es atzvech. Go and reduce yourself. And the moon was depressed. The moon was downtrodden. So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do to appease the moon, to pick the moon up, to make the moon feel better? He creates the stars, creates a kochavim. That means the stars from the very inception were there to relieve the moon, to help the moon feel better. Says Rav Shimon Schwab, that's the job of every Jew. The job of every Jew is every other Jew that we interact with, they should feel better for that interaction. Our job in life is to pick people up, to lift people. Somebody who's down in the dumps, pick them up. And always ask ourselves after any interaction, whether in person or on the phone, did that person walk away from me feeling, I'm glad I had the experience of interacting with him? Or I would be willing to pass on that experience from now ad mea ve'esrim. How does the person feel when he walks away from us? In Ponovich, Rav Shach Zatzal, Yeshivat Ponovich, so once walked into the base medrash, and he said, does anybody know where Ruvain is? I'm looking for Ruvain Ploni, I need Ruvain. So the Bachar went to look for this Ruvain, and they finally bring Ruvain over to Rav Shach. Rav Shach says to him, you know what, I'm learning Baba Kama, where is that, there's a certain Rabbi Akiva Eger I'm looking for, I can't find it. And when he looks, he goes to the shelf, brings over to Rabbi Akiva Eger, brings it back to Rav Shach, says, thank you very much. Ruvain leaves, and the Bachar are wondering. Rav Shach knew the locations of Rabbi Akiva Eger's like we know the location of Kriya Shema. He knew Rabbi Akiva Eger like we know Ashrei. I hope he's not insulted by my saying that. But he knew the Rabbi Akiva Eger, knew it well. He couldn't figure out what was going on. Shach said, well, 2 weeks ago, this Bachar was in a shidduch, and unfortunately the shidduch broke up. He'd been very down. I decided that, make him feel good, I'll ask him in front of everybody where the Rabbi Akiva Eger is. And the Yeshiva Ponovich, the Gaon HaGaonim, well, one Bachar is hurting, and he goes and he does something in order to pick him up. And by the way, it worked even better than perhaps that's what Rav Shach expected, because word got out that Ruvain Ploni is the person, the go-to guy for Rav Shach when he can't find a Maramako, and he had a shidduch with her a couple of weeks. And she was rich. So you never know. But one thing is clear, the tachlis of a Jew, that the person around us, make them feel better. Sensitivity. Careful. People have feelings. Rav Amgenachovsky Zatzal was Rosh Yeshiva of the Chibin Yeshiva. Massive masbid, massive Talmid Chacham. And he had a chavrusa with an avrech every Friday night. Every Friday night this avrech after the Suda would come over to Rav Genachovsky's house. They would learn together. One Friday night this avrech is walking up to the door, and his mind was somewhere else, and as he gets to the door, he rings the doorbell. World Shabbos, he rings the doorbell. And he's like, oh, he just rang Rosh Yeshiva's doorbell. And he waits, nothing happens. Waits, nothing happens. So he starts knocking. He knocks. After 10 minutes, a bleary-eyed Rav Genachovsky in his pajamas comes over, opens the door, says, "Uy, oh right, we have a chavrusa." I was After the Suda tonight, I was tired. I went to sleep. I heard you knocking. So I answered, just 1 second. Let me change and we'll learn. So he changes. I sit down to learn. And after Rav Genachowski was nifter, family said that's not what happened. Rav Genachowski did not forget a chavrusa. They may have forgotten to eat. He didn't forget a chavrusa. Rav Genachowski heard the doorbell ring. And he realized that if he answers the door on the ring, this Avrech is never going to live it down that the Rosh Yeshiva saw that he was B'chal Shabbos hearing the doorbell. So Genachowski got into his pajamas, he got into bed. And he waited till he knew the Avrech would then knock. And he got out of bed, and that way he could tell him it was the knock that woke me up, and he'll never know that it was the doorbell. That's the kind of sensitivity. That's what it means to be a star. To be a kochov. The same way that the stars were there to try to bring relief, try to bring a certain sense of joy to the moon, that's the job of every Jew. One of the areas that we find so tricky is avoiding confrontations. You know, somebody says something, somebody does something, and it could even be something like somebody sitting in our seat in shul. Somebody sits in our seat. You know, you walk into the Beis Medrash, you walk into your shul, and somebody's in your makom. That's my makom. Right? And there are very few crimes that are worse than taking somebody else's makom. And also, there are 3 types of people. There's the one guy who walks over, you're in his makom. There's one guy who just walks over, he's like, shh, that's my makom. He just thumbs you out. Okay, straight to the point. You got the other guy who's mamash at tzaddik yesod olam. He sees somebody in his seat, he goes sitting on the other side of the Beis Medrash, pulls his talus over his head, so the guy won't even know that he's in shul, that he shouldn't feel bad he's taking a seat. Mamash at tzaddik. Then you got the third guy, somewhere in between. He's the guy who walks over, he just kind of stares at you. And when you look up, you go, oh, is this you? No, sit. But I'm not going to be a tzaddik without you knowing about it. Right? You're going to, if I'm going to, none of this cheap, none of this tzaddik for free stuff. So we have so many potential confrontations. What happens when you avoid a confrontation? I'll tell you the Gemara in Chulin. It's unbelievable. Gemara says, Eina olam miskayim ela bishvil misha bolem es atzmo b'shas meriva. The world is sustained in the merit of somebody who is bolem es atzmo. No, theoretically it means he keeps his mouth closed when there's a fight. He doesn't respond. I heard once about a kehila. There were certain tragedies that happened to kehila that made a takana. You know, every kehila takes on a no lashon hara and say some tehillim, give tzedakah. This kehila took on that whenever somebody comes over and gives you musar, you won't respond. How's that for Kabbalah? No defending yourself. Right? Now bring on the tehillim, bring on the tzedakah. That's hard. That's tough. Somebody comes over and starts a confrontation, and you don't say anything. And the Gemara darshans us on the pasuk of Tola Eretz Al Blima. Kosh Baruch suspends the world in nothingness. What's holding us up? What's holding the world up? You know what's holding it up? The person who does not respond. Bolem es atzmo b'shas meriva. But I was once looking, if you're medayik in the words of the Gemara doesn't say somebody who does not speak when there's a confrontation. It says, Bolem es atzmo. He completely restrains himself. There isn't a move or a gesture that indicates displeasure. Because it's very often, a person can say something to you, you don't have to say anything. All you got to do is go like that. That's not avoiding a confrontation. I didn't say anything, but I wasn't bullying myself. I reacted, I responded. Torah says, Bolem es atzmo, b'shas meriva. Somebody who completely restrains himself. That's what keeps the world going. So we get to a Tisha B'Av. What's the purpose of a Tisha B'Av? What's the purpose of a fast day? The whole point is to do a little bit of self-introspection. A little bit thinking, Ayeka. Who are we? Where are we? Where are we meant to go? Rav Shteiman Zatzal, a Bacher once approached Rav Shteiman. He said he wanted to know in the yeshiva that he's at, they have a regular half-hour Musar Seder. They go to all yeshivas, a Musar Seder, half-hour. He wanted to know if they could extend the Musar Seder in the yeshiva. Let's make a little longer Musar Seder. Science fiction. That's what he said. Rav Shteinman said to him, I'll tell you the truth. The reason the amount of mussar a person needs a day is 5 minutes. You need 5 minutes to sit, reflect, think, introspect a little bit. That's all you really need. The reason we make it a half hour is it takes a half hour till you get warmed up, till it actually taps in, and you get that 5 minute window, that 5 minute chunk of introspection. But 5 minutes enough, you don't need more than that. To think, Ayeka, where are you? Where are we? Where are we going? What are we all about? Why are we here? What's our purpose? It's the whole purpose of the day. To mourn, to cry for a Beis HaMikdash. Okay. To the degree that it has a real connection to us. But at the end of the day, to tap in a little bit, what's my purpose here? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? What's the reason I'm alive? Ayeka, where are we? Where are we going with all this? What's our purpose? Rabbi Wasserman Zatzal came to the United States. He was fundraising for his yeshiva. They were starving in the Baranovich yeshiva. He was away from the yeshiva for about a year and a half. Eventually he went back and he was killed with the Bachrim. He was killed with his whole yeshiva during the war. Came to the United States on a fundraising trip. There was a man living somewhere in New York, originally had left Baranovich when he was a little boy, and he owned a big clothing garment factory. Very wealthy man. So Rabbi Chana made an appointment to come speak to this man. Rabbi Chana comes, meets this man, and the man, they schmooze around a little bit about Baranovich, the old days, this, that, and the other. And then at a certain point says, now Rabbi Wasserman, tell me, why have you come here? Rabbi Chana turns around, he picks up the back of his frock, and he shows him he's missing a button on his frock. He said, I came to have a button sewed onto my frock. You have a fabric factory, I want a button sewed on my frock. So the man starts laughing, and he says, Rabbi Wasserman, come with me. And he takes him out of his office, and he shows him the 3 stories of his factory, hundreds of workers making garments. And after showing off his wealth and his factory, he says, now Rabbi Wasserman, tell me, why have you come? Rabbi Chana says to him, I want to have a button sewed on my frock. The guy says, okay, he wants a joke, I'll show him who the comedian is. He says, hey Fred, come here. Calls Fred over, he says, sew a button on the rabbi's frock. He takes the frock, he sews the button on. Rabbi Chana says, thank you very much. He turns around and goes back to his host. Gets back to his host, and the next morning the phone rings very early. And the guy is going out of his kalim. He starts yelling, he says, Rabbi Wasserman, why did you come here? I lost a night's sleep because of you. You couldn't have come here just to get a button sewed on your coat. Now what do you want? So Rabbi Chana says, I'll speak to you later today. So he goes down again to the office, and he says to the guy, you're troubled. I traveled a couple of 1,000 miles from Europe to the United States, and I told you I want to get a button sewed on my uniform, on my frock. That disturbs you. My friend, your neshama came down through 7 heavens, which is a lot further than Europe for the United States. And you're telling me your neshama came all the way down here just to sew buttons on people's coats? That's what you came down here for? The man became frum and became a supporter of the Baranovich Yeshiva. One Musar Shmos. That's what Tisha B'Av is all about. That's what a fast day is all about. It's about a little bit of introspection. And Rabbosai, I just want to tell you, it doesn't have to be something drastic. And to the contrary, generally preferable not. A slight step forward. Rav Perlman, one of the fabulous Rabbeim we've had here in the yeshiva. So I just spoke to him a couple of days ago. He told me a maisa. The young lady was looking for a shidduch. And she called a Rav, I don't remember if he said it was Rav Chaim Kanievsky, one of the Gedolim. She said, what could I do as a schus to find a shidduch? So he said, I want you to be mischazik in Shmiras Shabbos. She said, what should I do? I would like you to take on Shabbos. Make sure every week to take on Shabbos early. So the girl started just kind of rolling her eyes, wow, that's not as easy as it sounds. Every single week does it. He says to her, I see that might be overwhelming for you. If that's too hard, I want you to go out and buy a new pair of shoes, And I want you to designate these shoes as your Shabbos shoes. That'll be the way you're mechabed Shabbos. And only wear them on Shabbos. At that point she lights up. Can you imagine a female in the world doesn't want to buy a new pair of shoes? Hey, it doesn't matter how many you have. You don't have to be Mrs. Marcos or Marcos over there had 12,000 pairs of shoes, but every young lady in the world would like a new pair of shoes. And she scampers out happily to go buy her new pair of shoes. That's going to be her special Shabbos shoes. The Prophet said, you see, the message is, it doesn't have to be something drastic, it doesn't even have to be something hard, but it has to be something. Something. One step, no pun intended. One step, one move, a little bit, just shake it a little bit, and move up with it a little bit. That's all the Rebbeinu Shalom asks for us. If we pick up our end of the deal, we respond to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Eicha, Ayeka. Where are you? Who are you? Where do you expect to be? And we move in that direction even a little bit. Then we all know it's been a difficult year. It's been a difficult year on many fronts. We need a lot of Yeshuas. We need a lot of brachas. We need a lot of Yeshuas. We do ours. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Be'ezer Hashem, bring us all the Yeshuas and the Chamas, B'Korov. Amen.